Howdy, and welcome to Brandi's Book Stack. Today, I thought we'd talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and that is back to school. My kids are going back to school, and with the advent of new classes this year, of course comes the dreaded required reading list. So I thought it might be fun to go back and look at some of the books that I was required to read when I was in high school. So I'm going to go through a few of these, and maybe you'll remember some of these novels and plays from when you were in school. Please make sure to leave a comment down below if you do. So we'll go ahead and start off. One of the first novels, or plays, I should say, was the Oedipus plays of Sophocles. I read this in high school. This was not a required reading in that I had a list of books that the whole class read, although we did all read Oedipus Rex. I chose on my own to read Oedipus at Colonus and Antigone. And I even saw these performed when I was a high school senior. And I used the Oedipus at Colonus and Antigone. We had a segment of books, and I probably should start out with sort of the three types of required reading, because there are about three types as far as I see it. First is the books that you all read as a class, that everybody in your class was required to read those specific books. Then there are the books that your teacher gave you a big long list of books, and you could pick so many off of that list. Then there was you had to read a book, usually at least of a certain length, but you could pick anything that your little heart desired. Well, this was one of those. I believe I picked this off the list of books that I could read. There was a big long list of classic books, and we could read anything off of it. So I used Oedipus at Colonus and Antigone for those. And here's a tip, kids. If you're looking for a short work to read, something that won't take you a lot of time, plays are a great choice because they do tend to be pretty quick reads. Now, you have to still, like a lot of classic literature, get used to the language used, but they are pretty quick to get through. I don't know if that's why I did that or not. I never feared the reading list when it came out, simply because I've always loved to read, and I've always loved discovering new favorites. And I did discover a lot of new favorites through the classics that I read. So that's Sophocles. Kind of continuing in that same vein, we all read Edith Hamilton's mythology, or selections from it. But I enjoyed it so much, I read the entire thing. Edith Hamilton gives you kind of just a selection of stories throughout Greek mythology from a variety, I believe it's a variety of authors as well. And just kind of familiarizes you with the Greek world. If you've never checked out Edith Hamilton, if you are, for example, interested in Greek mythology, maybe you've read the Percy Jackson series like my son has, this is a great kind of level up version of that. And you can see the myths that they all came from. And keep in mind, you're talking thousands of years ago these were written, and yet they're still relevant today. We still read them as entertainment today. I think that's pretty cool. So that's Edith Hamilton's mythology. One thing I did read pretty early on is we got to, again, pick off a list for certain novels, and one of the works that I picked was Cyrano de Bergerac. It's another play. I think I was kind of in a hurry because, like most teenagers, I was busy, and I didn't want to spend all of my time reading, even though I did enjoy it. And this seemed like it would be something interesting. Cyrano de Bergerac, if you're not familiar, he's the guy with the gigantic nose. Although, if you read the play, you come to find out that really maybe his nose isn't all that big. It's maybe more in his imagination more than anything else. He over exaggerates his own flaw, which is something I think a lot of us do. But he loves the beautiful Roxanne, but feels because of his nose, he is too ugly to woo her. And so he ends up wooing her through Christian. He gives the character Christian the words to say. And it's funny, and it is exciting, and it's a tragic love story. It's just a nice little play. And I really, really enjoyed it. It's something I've reread since then, and I still enjoy today. Another favorite is Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. I read this as a freshman in high school. This had a profound impact on me, and it's a good example, at least to me, of the way reading a book can actually change your viewpoint on things. I grew up in the middle of the Bible Belt. People tend to be very pro-censorship in my community. And this is a book that actually changed my mind about censorship and showed me what that could devolve into. And the really cool thing is this particular edition, my husband took it to Comic-Con and got it signed by Ray Bradbury himself, which is super cool. And of course, Ray Bradbury has since passed away and is no longer with us. And so it's really neat to have that. And this is a great story about censorship. Definitely worth a read. Now, the next book that I have on my list is The Count of Monte Cristo. And if any of you are familiar with this vintage cover, you might notice this is abridged. And I had asked my teacher if I could read this despite it being abridged. And I'm so very glad that my teacher said yes, because I love this novel. And I've since read the unabridged version. But you can see it's a bit intimidating, right? And I think if you don't let teenagers, read some abridged works, they're going to take one look at this hefty chonker and go, no way, not reading it. So I'd rather them take an opportunity and maybe read something abridged, and maybe do like my teacher did and say, okay, I have to approve it. I have to know that there's enough of the story there that you're going to get the feel of it at least. But an abridged version of Count of Monte Cristo is not a huge deal. Matter of fact, there's more abridged versions and copies of it out there than there are the big chunker. So if you don't know what the Count of Monte Cristo is about, in my opinion, it's the ultimate adventure story. You follow Edmond Dantes, who is a young man on the threshold of life, the world at his feet. He just got a promotion. He's got a gorgeous fiance, happy as he can be. And two men who are jealous of him plot to overthrow him and tell lies about him, get him thrown into the notorious Chateau d'If, where he eventually manages, with the help of a priest that he meets in the prison, he manages to escape, and he comes back as the mysterious Count of Monte Cristo, bent on seeking his revenge. And his revenge is so well crafted and so well calculated. It's just an amazing story to watch unravel. Definitely recommend if you've never tried it. It is worth the chonker, but if you're like, man, I'm just not going to read something that long, read the abridged version. It's a good way to dip your toe in it, and if you really like it, you can always go back and read this one. Now, maybe a book that I didn't enjoy so much, and that is Wuthering Heights. My brother gave me this beautiful copy of Wuthering Heights, and there's a matching version of Jane Eyre. You'll see this one's really pretty because I read it once. Jane Eyre I read several times, so it's kind of beat up by now. But Wuthering Heights I just didn't enjoy. I thought it was kind of brooding and emo and not really my scene. I don't know anyone that read it at the time that I did that really particularly enjoyed it. But there's lots of people on the internet who think it's the best of the Brontes novels. I disagree. I think that's Tenet of Wildfell Hall. So watch my video on that. But I did read it, and it is considered kind of a seminal work of Gothic literature. So if you haven't read it and you're into classics particularly, you should absolutely read it. I'm going to reread this one again here soon. It's on my list of best books of all time. And I want to get to see if my youthful opinion still matches my adult opinion on Wuthering Heights. And by the way, Count of Monte Cristo was a selected book for me, one I selected off the list to read. Wuthering Heights was assigned to me specifically. Next, we have Tale of Two Cities. This is another copy of a novel that my brother got to me with these beautiful sprayed edges. And I read this when I was in high school, and this is an odd one because I actually really, really liked it in high school. But reading it again as an adult, I felt was just not as good. It kind of went down in my estimation. And I think that's because one of the main female characters in this novel, Lucy Manette, I felt like she was just flat and didn't have much of a personality. And I didn't find her a realistic person. She's this sort of woman that is perfect, and men just do anything for her because she's just so sweet and perfect, and oh my goodness. And I just find that boring. Now, Madame Defarge in this book, that's a great character. It's still definitely worth a read, Tale of Two Cities is, but I just don't like it as much as I did when I initially read it as a kid. But it does have lots of drama, if that's what you're into. Set during the French Revolution, we follow some characters in it, and I don't want to give away too much of the plot, but it all kicks off when a man has been released from prison after being unfairly detained there for 20 years. I believe it's 20 years, 20 or 30 years. And he'd been done wrong by the aristocracy. But then you also see how the terror, as it was called later, got out of hand, and how people who were on the side of good ended up paying a price that they shouldn't have had to pay. It's really good from that perspective. It has a twist ending that I do think you kind of see coming, but it's still a good twist ending anyway. Next on the list is Jane Eyre, as I talked about before. You can see the matching copy, but you can see it's kind of a little beaten and bruised. I loved this novel. This is also a Gothic novel where we follow Jane Eyre. We follow her from her youth, being sent to Lowood School and learning to become a governess, and then eventually taking a position as a governess, falling in love with Mr. Rochester, finding out there's a great mystery associated with Mr. Rochester, and then I won't give away the ending, but I mean, it's a romance. You can kind of figure out where this one's going. And I love this novel. I think I had not read Tenet of Wildfell Hall, when I first read this. I do think it is the superior Bronte novel. Not that it's fair to compare them just because they're sisters, but Jane Eyre is really good too, and I think it's really worth reading Jane Eyre with Wide Sargasso Sea by John Reyes, who there is a mad woman in the attic that shows up in Jane Eyre. If you know, you know. And Wide Sargasso Sea tells the story of that woman. So it's worth a read, and it's a great companion piece to this novel. One of the things I do love about this is it's a romance that doesn't start when the heroine meets the hero. It actually tells the entire story of Jane Eyre's life, and I think that's what makes this special to me. And this is one I chose to read because my brother had bought me this book right about the time that I was having to select some books to read. So we also read Great Expectations. I don't think I still have my copy. I might. It's around here somewhere. Which in high school I absolutely hated. I think I was too young for it, to be honest. And we read a slew of other books that I have. Ooh, I'm dropping things on a list here. We read Curtains of Green by Eudora Welty. This is a book I wish I had held on to. Eudora Welty is a Southern writer with a very different perspective, and she's certainly more modern than many of these other books that I've been mentioning as classics. And I thought she wrote some really good, thought-provoking stories that were so different in voice from everything else we read. I thought it was a great choice by our English teacher. We also, of course, read Shakespeare. Everybody does, right? Or most everybody that I know read Shakespeare in high school. We read Romeo and Juliet, which I just didn't care for. I don't think it's one of Shakespeare's better plays. We read Hamlet, and these are plays that we read as a group, Romeo and Juliet. Hamlet, which, I mean, it's Shakespeare's masterpiece. Of course, you're going to read Hamlet. Now, how many really appreciated it to the full? I know I did, but I was a book geek even then. Most, I think, just found it boring and hard to get through. If you're a kid and you're gonna read Hamlet, I highly suggest that you get one of those copies that has the modern English on one side and the Shakespearean English on the other. It really helps you out when you don't understand what's being said. We also read Macbeth, which is another play I don't think is one of Shakespeare's strongest, my personal opinion only. And then I personally chose to read Merchant of Venice. And I love that play. It's my favorite play. I've talked before about how I love Merchant of Venice. I know there are some people who find it problematic. I disagree, and I've talked about that in previous videos, but that is one that I read in high school. Another few books that I read were 1984 by George Orwell. As I've mentioned many times on this channel, I don't love dour, depressing stories. Well, that's kind of 1984. It doesn't end on a hopeful note, and I just didn't care for it. I thought Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, which I did also read kind of back to back. 1984 was a class read, and then Brave New World I think I decided to read on my own. And I could be misremembering that. It's been a few years. We also read a selection of poetry, and I don't remember every poet that we read. I do remember we read quite a few Emily Dickinson and some Walt Whitman. I specifically remember When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed. I remember reading that from Walt Whitman. And I remember The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock by, I believe that's T.S. Eliot. And that had a big impact on me, that poem. I remember my teacher talking about how the theme of that poem, or one of the themes of that poem, is that true love is worth the risk. And that's something that really stuck with me since then. Another poem, of course, from Emily Dickinson. I remember, I heard a fly buzz when I died. I remember at the time, I wasn't a huge fan of Emily Dickinson. I think I kind of looked at her as, man, she was a weirdo. She only wore white. She was kind of mopey and weird to everybody who knew her. And then they discovered all these poems after she was dead. She didn't really speak to me then, and I don't know that she really speaks to me all that much now. But again, maybe due for a reread. And that's something I'd like to talk about specifically, is how our viewpoints change over time. Like I mentioned, Tale of Two Cities, I did not like that. I liked that when I read it in high school, but I didn't like it as much when I read it as an adult. The opposite with Great Expectations. I hated that in high school. I thought it was terrible. But then as an adult, I reread it and I appreciated it more. So that's another thing. If you're an adult and you think, man, classics aren't for me. I read that crap when I was in high school and I didn't like any of it. Number one, maybe you just didn't find the right classic. And then number two, maybe you just didn't really appreciate it for your time of life. One book that I know I feel that way about is Old Man and the Sea. And I think a lot of younger kids choose to read Old Man and the Sea when they're young because, again, it's slim. So it's an easy read. And yet, when they read it, I don't see how a younger person could easily understand it. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure there's exceptions out there who really get it and find it beautiful. But I think as an aging adult, someone in middle age, that's a novella that, I could really understand and appreciate. That sort of growing irrelevance as you get older and how you struggle personally with that. How do I stay relevant? Am I still relevant? Can I still contribute to my society? How do I, impart a piece of me into the next generation? And those are all struggles that are addressed in Old Man and the Sea so beautifully, so succinctly by Ernest Hemingway. And if I had read that in high school, I would have probably hated Hemingway and never returned to it. So it's always worth a shot going back and revisiting some of those older classics that you read back when you were in high school. Another one, Great Gatsby. That's another one I hated in high school, and I'm going to read it again coming up here pretty soon. And we'll see. Again, did my opinion change? Or do I still feel the same way about it? I found sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. Now, talking about my kids, what are they reading? So I think that's kind of interesting. I have noticed some significant trends in the books my children have been assigned to read. One, I'd say they have been assigned far more minority authors. That's actually very controversial right now in our nation, but particularly in Oklahoma, where I live, there's a lot of call to ban particularly trans literature from our schools, gay literature from our schools. And I have a booktube channel. I'm not real big on banning books, but it is an argument. But when I was growing up, that argument wouldn't have even been heard. So I guess we've moved the needle forward, at least some. The other thing that they read more of is more world literature, which I think is really great. When I was growing up, you read mainly English language literature. That's it. You might have a little German or French thrown in there. Maybe, you go to Spain for Don Quixote, but that would be it. And now our kids are encouraged, and on their reading list, there's a lot more world literature on it, which is great. I will say it makes the game even harder for, I think, our literature teachers to figure out what books they're going to pick, because you have to limit, particularly when you're talking about novels, because kids can only read so many novels in a year. And choosing which novels to read, how many to let them pick on their own, I don't envy our teachers for having to make those decisions. I don't know that I could do it. I thought about making a video about what would be on my required reading list, and I thought I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. For one, I think it's already a struggle when you assign kids books to read, because it already has a tendency, once it's made an assignment, to suck the fun out of it. And the more you have to winnow that down, the more of an assignment it feels like. I think that kids, and myself included, looking at my list, they learn more when they internalize it more when they have at least some choice in what they're going to select to read. Being assigned a certain work and everybody has to read it, it does make it easy for it to become a chore and an assignment. So let me know what you think. What did you read when you were in high school? If you have left, or if you're currently in high school, what do you wish you would have read? Do you think that there should be a required reading list? Should we be allowed to pick and choose? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and click that bell. Bye.